He's all fired up to take on a long-term incumbent in Ward 10. Can it happen? Well, Jeff Beattie thinks so, and he's tried it before. But is this the year that's going to make the difference? Is this the election where we're going to see change in Lower Stony Creek? Is this the election where Maria Pearson might in fact not come back to that city council? Let's find out by meeting Jeff Beattie. Jeff, welcome to the OShow.
Thank you, Laura. So great to be here today.
This year on the OShow, we've been looking at intriguing ward races. And I think there's nothing more intriguing than thinking you can take on an incumbent. I was trying to add up all the years that Maria Pearson has been representing that area. And you can help me out here, but it feels like almost 20 years on the current council. But she was also part of the Stony Creek Council prior to amalgamation. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think if you were to kind of aggregate everything together, going back pre-amalgamation, you're somewhere in the 28 upwards of 30-year range. To put it in perspective, my mother was a city councilor on Stony Creek City Council and actually sat with Maria for a period of time. So that gives you some breadth and depth. I was in college at the time. So
in your Spectator
yes.
coverage from March, they described you as being all fired up to take her on, and we'll get into that in a moment.
Yep.
But you also said you have to be respectful of her tenure. And then I noticed some quotes from you about her not evolving maybe with the times. Can you square that for me, Jeff? What is your perspective on her governance?
Well, she has a particular pattern, and when I say that I have to respect it, it's probably due to my upbringing that you respect those in power. You may not agree with them, but certainly you don't get to be in her position as long as she has without doing something right, or you wouldn't be there. So I know that she's a hardworking person. I know that she's a heck of a campaigner. Mm-hmm. And when I was the school board trustee for the area for Ward 10, her and I were counterparts, for lack of a better term, and I got to interact with her. And she has a certain way of doing things, and it's served her well. But in terms of the evolutionary piece, I would suggest that as the community has changed and is changing, particularly with the boundary realignment that took place in 2018, I don't think that her style of leadership has kept up. And I think that the appetite of the community is good and ready for something different and a change. And kind of the theme that I'm going on is change for the better.
So what do you see in terms of her policy decisions, especially around development in your area? And as you mentioned, the realignment that's going on.
Well, what we're experiencing is I'd say an unprecedented rate of growth, and it's not by surprise. We all knew that it was coming. It's been planned. Even if you go back to the days of the old Saltfleet Township before pre-amalgamation, 1972, when Wentworth County and Saltfleet Township were absorbed into the region of Hamilton-Wentworth and the then town of Stony Creek, there was certainly plans at that time that eventually this whole neck of the woods, former rural community, would be eventually urbanized and developed. So we all knew it was coming, but it, I think, is catching some people by surprise. The density that's being proposed, number one, and particularly the fact that our infrastructure really hasn't kept pace with development. They did a leapfrog type of development here in Winona, where they jumped over a big portion of undeveloped land, started at the very edge of the city, and now working their way backwards. And it's left us kind of isolated out here in this part of the ward, but certainly lacking in infrastructure. We don't have any transit. Our road system is very antiquated. We have improper sidewalks. We don't really have enough parks. And when the types of developments that are being proposed come before the community, common sense would tell you that they're just not appropriate. They're not sustainable for this area. And there seems to be a disconnect between what the community recognizes as the reality on the ground and perhaps Councillor Pearson's viewpoint that this is just going to have to happen anyways.
Well, is it a disconnect, or is she being funded by developers in her campaigns?
Well, trying to stick to that being respectful piece.
It's public knowledge who gives
It
to
is
the
public
counselors,
knowledge. I
right?
mean, I would never want to throw shade,
Mhm.
but the facts do speak for themselves. If you look through the campaign contributions to her 2018 candidacy, it was heavily funded by the development community to the tune of, into the tens and twenties of thousands of dollars. So that's something that I think, like you said, it's public knowledge. People can read between the lines there. That she is positioned often as a pro-development counselor, as somebody who can get things done for developers. And when the community sees this, they become quite upset because they have elected somebody to represent them and their interests, not necessarily the interests of a much smaller group with possibly a different agenda or a different perspective on where things need to go.
Well, you answered that very respectfully. But I mean, we have to talk about how these incumbents operate, because it partly is why they are incumbents, right? They get funding for their campaigns. They have name recognition coming out of the gate. They have a lot of advantage. They have
Yes,
money to spend, as
certainly.
counselors. So why do you think that you can win? I mean, you came, what, 24% of the vote last time, Jeff? What makes you think
That's
that you
correct. Yeah.
can get enough this time to actually beat Maria Pearson?
Well, if you look at the outcome of the 2018 election, as you mentioned, 24%, but the overall change vote was much higher. It was 62% to her roughly 38%. The numbers, they're somewhere in there. Unfortunately, there were a lot of different options on the ballot for change. There were 3 candidates that were running to replace her. And we all ended up carving up the vote. And that 62% got chopped up in ways that allowed for the incumbent to regain her position with a painfully low, I would suggest a painfully low approval rating. And I think right now, anyways, the community is aligning with let's support one individual, let's have one good solid candidate, and I'm thankful that so far that they've chosen that I might be that person. And I also I don't do things the same way over and over again and hope that I get different results. I can follow my sword a little bit, and I can look at what went wrong, what went right in the 2018 campaign, and do what I would do in my business profession, do what I would do as a member of various community organizations, and that is make adjustments, evolve into the role, and make some changes on course to correct things that may not have gone terribly well, and present things in a stronger, more confident fashion for voters. And voters have been responding very well to it. So I'm going back to that piece about being fired up. I'm very energized by it, and feeling very confident that we're going to have a very different outcome in October 2022.
Well, you came out swinging to get a spec article back in March. Uh, so, props for the courage there. But do you think that there is a sufficient appetite for real change, for real votes for non-incumbents in this election? Do you think that people are finally saying, just because I know her and I like her and she's been nice to me over the last 30 years, doesn't mean that there isn't another viable option in Winona and Lower Stony Creek, somebody who could represent me for the future? Do you think that we're finally getting there, Jeff? And I'm not just talking about in your ward, I'm talking about like across the city.
Well, I would have a hard time speaking from a citywide purview, because one thing that I've learned over the course of my lifetime, and particularly when I was a trustee with the district school board, and I served as vice chair there, and spent a lot of time in many different parts of the city. Every part of our city has different nuances. Every piece is a little bit different than the other. There's a lot of similarities, but even within, say, a ward structure, you may go to, and I spent a lot of time in wards 1 and 2, working with the trustee there. And even within that community, you could have a neighborhood that was very, very different and unique, and then go across the street and something completely different over there. And I think that that's part of the strength and beauty of Hamilton. So I can't really offer too much knowledge outside of what my bird's eye view of what's happening across the city, but particularly in Ward 10, in Stony Creek, and here in Winona. What I'm seeing different this time around is a different demographic coming forward, where people that may have been more likely to support Maria in the past are telling me that, we have had good experience, but we really feel it's time for a change. And they're coming from areas of the ward that perhaps I didn't show as strong in last go round in 2018. And that's part of what's encouraging, is when you have entire streets that are contacting you, entire neighborhoods that are starting to knock on doors on your behalf and rally people in their neighborhoods to say, it really is time to be thinking about the future. It is really time to have a different perspective and break the status quo. I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. And I'm a big believer that the status quo is just a comfortable place that we fall into, but it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't prepare us for anything. It doesn't solve any problems. It just keeps retreading the same old over again. And people have seen, particularly, I think, over the last 4 years, particularly in the last 2 years, when we were at home and we were focused on a lot of municipal issues, that doing the same thing the same way is not going to prepare us for the future, and it's certainly not serving us well in even the current context. And people are, I think, far more aware of that in 2022.
I think that's an excellent answer. I respect that you're not sort of speaking more broadly than your knowledge, which is something I always love to hear from candidates, right? You don't have to assume things. You can just say, I don't know how other people feel in other parts of the city. But I think you're brilliant in the part about what COVID did. People started to watch council. They started to watch council on Zoom. Before, when they were in their cars and traveling, they might have relied on shows like the OShow and others reporting in town, Joey Coleman and stuff like that, to say, here's what's happening. But during COVID, they actually had the time to watch delegations and to see the disruptive and the most generous way I can say is unprofessional demeanor around the council table. I mean, I've got a colleague, a host of a show in Toronto that I do, who likens Hamilton Council to like Alabama politics. He can't understand how it acts like that. No offense, Alabama, but he doesn't mean it in a kind way. But the point is, Hamilton Council has a reputation for being toxic and dysfunctional and full of scandal and meetings that collapse on themselves. And Hamiltonians had a chance to watch that in COVID. So what do you bring to the table that's different than that? What is your vision if you're sitting around that council table, not just representing Ward 10, but representing Hamilton?
For sure. And I think that just to build on that piece where you're talking about citizens of Hamilton sitting around watching, the rest of the world, the rest of the province also watching. And if you were someone that, let's say you were a business owner and you were thinking of prospectively coming and doing business in Hamilton, would that be something that would encourage you or discourage you from coming and doing business in our city when that is what you're seeing around the horseshoe, as it were? I think that's important outside of just what's happening for our trust in our municipal government from a constituent level. But it has bigger ramifications outside of that. And I think that has to be stated very clearly as well, that we're not doing ourselves any favors for economic growth, for working with other levels of government and things like that to get stuff done in Hamilton and to grow Hamilton. But to come back to what does Jeff do differently? I have a lot of experience working on boards. I have a lot of experience in community boards. I had some time on the school board, committee work. And I'm a big believer in decorum, and I'm a big believer in having rules of how meetings are supposed to proceed and sticking to them, because you can spend a lot of time and waste a lot of time kind of going around in circles, and that's not what we're there to do. We're there to get stuff done, to present a plan and a vision for the current situation as well as for the future of Hamilton. And anything else when we're not doing that, it's really a bit of a distraction. So if we can focus on getting these things done and spend our time efficiently addressing the issues of the day and the issues of the future, I think it will go a long way, not only to do what we're meant to do as the governors, the leaders of the community, but also to restore faith and restore trust of the general public when they can watch these meetings and say, okay, yeah, I see that they're doing things in a more orderly, respectful fashion. I'm more engaged, and I'm feeling better about the future in my community, and those other people that are watching from outside of Hamilton to look at that and say, okay, this looks like a council that's got their act together, and maybe I would take a second look in investing in Hamilton or doing something in a bigger scale. So I think that I can bring that toolkit of experience of being respectful, collaborating, and trying to get things done in a respectful but efficient manner.
Well, you're right. It is brand damage, right? And it affects
Yeah.
investment, and we don't even understand the ramifications of it because people just look at it and go, "No, thanks." You know, I have a lot of clients out of market who are like, "What is happening there?"
I have heard the same thing. I mean, I have business connections. I know people in the business community that have had bad experiences in Hamilton. I've had business owners tell me that they would never do business in the city of Hamilton again. I think that's a tragedy to hear that from somebody that has the ability to invest in Hamilton, create jobs in Hamilton, pay taxes in Hamilton. If they have such a bad taste in their mouth that they're prepared to go to a different jurisdiction just to make those investments, that's our loss, and it's a loss that we can't measure because we never knew it was there, but it's not good for us.
No, there's literally a segment on News Talk 1010 by Jerry Agar called "What's Wrong with Hamilton?" He does, I think, weekly, right? It's not bad. So let me just let's pinpoint then some of those issues, because I want a sort of a quick take on where you are, because I've never met you before, and I'm not sure where you stand on some of this stuff. Let's talk Sewergate. If you were sitting there in camera and the city lawyers came in and said, we've been dumping 24 billion liters of mixed sewage from an open gate into our world biosphere, Shadow Creek into Coots Paradise, but we're not going to tell people the extent and depth of this thing because, you know, legal tells us that we open ourselves up to litigation or whatever if we do. What would Jeff Beattie do in a circumstance like that?
Well, you know, I always tell my kids that, to be honest, and I always tell my kids that if you aren't honest and upfront right away, it's just going to catch up with you, and it's going to be worse later. So if somebody comes and says, gosh, you're going to put yourself in a position of risk or exposure, it's a liability, so you should keep quiet. Well, somebody's going to find out eventually, and then you're going to be in a position of more risk and more exposure and more liability because you didn't act earlier rather than you know, the holding it in and keeping it under wraps. So gosh, I'd have a really hard time supporting keeping things like that secret, because I know that it's going to come out and we're all going to look bad eventually. So I always like to get out in front of things, deal with it head on, admit when you went wrong, you know, fall on your sword, as the saying goes, and that would be my proposition. And again, I'm not in the room. I don't know what was presented to council at the time. I can only speak on hearsay. But at the same time, my moral values and my ethical values and my business background would dictate that moving ahead and just falling on your sword and admitting that something's happened and this is what we're going to do about it, having a plan for remediation and plan for dealing with it in the future, I think it would have built more trust in the general public, and I think that the outcome would have been better for council as a whole. But again, that's water under the bridge now, so so to speak.
I mean, it's a litmus test, though, right? About leadership, accountability, and values. Because often the old guard, as some of us characterize them, not because of their age, but because of their tenure and their approach to things, is to go on camera more than almost any other council and to keep things from the public. Red Hill and Sewergate and on it goes. So if people are going to come into the council chamber, one of the things that matters certainly to myself, and I think a lot of the OShow viewers, is are you going to be transparent and accountable where you can be? I mean, obviously there's some
Yes,
stuff that's HR that you can't. There are in-camera meetings for reasons.
sure.
But is it going to be about the city, the entity of the city, the corporate entity, or is it going to be about your constituents and their health and safety and trust in their public officials, right?
Yes,
So let me ask you just about a couple of other things, because I think the
sure.
Hamilton brand was not just damaged because of Sewergate and the cover-up or Red Hill and the cover-up. I think it was also
Yes.
damaged in the summer of hate when we had some of
Hmm.
the top hate reporting in the country. And we had a mayor and many on council who didn't seem to think it was an issue to deal with head on. And we had a violent attack at Pride, also not dealt with as you would expect other cities would have. And that was a real
Hmm.
letdown for a lot of us. And I think a real black mark on our city. So how would you approach things like that when our marginalized communities are attacked, when we have inequity in our city? Are those things important for you?
They are. I think anytime when you have um, a section within our broader community, a community within the community that feels disconnected, it's a symptom of that we're generally doing something wrong. And I always like to try to understand where it is that we failed and try to make corrections on that. It comes back to similar to what I said for the Sewergate issue. Admit what you know, admit what you don't know, and come out and address things in a proactive manner and say, you know what, we did something wrong here clearly, and we want to work with the affected parties to make amends, to learn from what went wrong, and try to ensure that it doesn't happen again. I feel sometimes that some people, when they're in a position, in an elected position, they feel that they have to maintain this facade of I know everything and I'm all knowing and all wise, and I don't want to show any cracks in the armor. And that's never been my approach. If I do something wrong, I admit it, and I'm not prepared to pretend that I have all the answers. But I want to show empathy for those that have had something happen to them, and I want to work with them to not have that experience again. So again, it's a very similar answer, I think.
Well, you know what, Jeff, I'm hearing empathy and humility, and those are two things that I think Hamilton Council has been bereft of for years. So I'm happy to hear it. In our closing moment, what's the sort of
Sure.
message you want to send to Ward 10? What do they need to understand that maybe they don't so far about your vision for the community or as a leader in Hamilton, and then where they can find out more information?
Well, I think, and I said this when we had a little meet and greet campaign launch on a patio here in the Winona area last week, and I addressed my supporters in my group then. And number one, I fundamentally love where I live. Like I just, hands down, I have an emotional connection to my community, and I spend every day thinking about trying to make it better, either through my business, through my volunteer work, or just as Joe average citizen. I've lived here my whole life. My family has deep roots. We go back on the property I'm sitting on here. My great grandfather purchased in 1890, so I'm grounded where I am, and I want nothing more than for our community to constantly do better, and for people to feel pride in where they live. If you know me through your interactions with me, whether it's through the different community organizations or through coming and shopping in my store, you probably have a good sense of what I'm about. I read the same in person as I do in this interview. There's nothing really different about me, and I would say to those people who haven't yet met me or don't know me, find someone that has, and find someone that does, and they'll probably be able to explain to you even better than I can, because sometimes I'm not the person that, I don't spend a lot of time patting myself on the back, but they can tell you that I'm committed to this. I love where I live. I love our community, and I want to be respectful, a little bit forceful when need be. But at the end of the day, it's about, as my grandfather would have said, leaving the world in a better place than you found it, preparing for the future, putting things in place that set us up for success. And that's the key to everything I've done, and my track record speaks to that. And I would certainly hope that folks would do that research, or just look me up, come find me, and I'm happy to talk, and hopefully they have
And if
a
tens
good
of
experience
thousands of
in
developer
listening to me.
dollars, if tens of thousands of developer dollars suddenly start flowing towards your campaign, Jeff, because you look like you could win, what happens with your decision making?
I'd probably, I don't think that that's going to happen. I suspect that the developer community is probably leaning in a different direction. But that's not to say, I'm not going to accept funding from the development community, but I don't think I would turn down a conversation, because at the end of the day, I know development's going to happen, and we're still going to have respectful and meaningful conversations about how things progress. So I'm not going to be confrontational in that regard, but I'm certainly not going to put myself in a position of a sort of perceived conflict or something that would look hypocritical. I hold those values very true. So I have supporters that have contributed to the campaign, but they are everyday citizens, and I'm very happy with that, and I'm very thankful too, because it I think speaks volumes to what I'm doing, and that I'm doing something right.
Wow. Well, thank you I kind of slid that one in there at the end, but I was just so curious to see what you said. So where can people find out more information about your campaign, Jeff?
Certainly. If you go to jeffbeattie.ca, that's probably the starting point. And I'm on most social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and even started playing around with TikTok, which is a scary realm for a 47-year-old guy. So you can look me up in there and either laugh or shake your head, depending on how you come out of that video watching experience.
Well, now that you've said that, my daughter, who's 11 and a TikTok, or 12, just 12, a TikTok aficionado, she's going to check that out and tell me what she thinks of your TikTok action.
Oh boy.
Don't worry, I can't do it either. Well, it was so great to meet you, Jeff, and thank you, as
Likewise.
I say to everybody who puts their time into running for office, especially against a long-term incumbent. It's a hill to climb, but it sounds like you're well on your way. So all the best, and thank you for being on the OShow.
I appreciate the invite, Laura, and we'll keep in touch, I'm sure.
And everybody, please vote on October 24th, whether you vote for Jeff or Maria or whoever you're going to vote for mayor. We will have Andrea Horvath on the program, and Keenan Lunas is coming up again on the program. Make sure you get out on October 24th and vote. It's so important for our democracy and for the future of our city. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.